Starting this off, because of what we're doing today being so reliant on what we did yesterday, the beginning of our notes today is really just kind of what we did yesterday. It's bringing that information back. Writing a conditional, a converse, an inverse, a contrapositive. And part of the reason that we are going to do that is that some of y'all that turned in your homework yesterday, the last two problems you didn't actually read the instructions and do.
Like the one that turned it in?
You did fine. You did helpful. Yes. Some people that turned it in yesterday turned it in with the last two problems undone, which were focused on this concept. So, when you see, write the conditional, converse, inverse, and contrapositive, you got 4 sentences to write. Okay, first one we're writing is the one that goes from P to Q. Is that the conditional, the converse, the inverse, or the contrapositive? That's the original conditional. What word starts every conditional statement or converse or inverse or contrapositive? If. In this case, if P. Your phone is put away. After P comes what word? Then. Technically, if you want to be completely accurate, you should have a comma and then the word then. I'm not looking at that. Then, what was that, Jalen?
Your learning is improved.
Your learning is improved. That's the Q. The next one it has written down goes from Q to P. That one is the converse. By the way, do these always have to go in the order of conditional, converse, inverse, contrapositive? No, so make sure you're reading. Especially on the worksheet that comes back after break, I do have them out of order. Converse. We already established it starts with the word if. If what? Your learning is improved. After the if comes the then. Your phone is away. The next one's got squiggles. Inverse, because what the heck did the squiggles mean? Not. Not P, then not Q is the inverse. If your phone is not away. Your phone is not put away. Then your learning is not improved. Last one, squiggle Q to squiggle P. Well, it's the last one, so it better be the contrapositive. It's the most complicated of the ones. If your learning is not improved, then your phone is not put away, or your phone isn't away, if you want to shorten it. So those are the things that we focused on yesterday, and we need to talk about those in order to talk about this next type of conditional statement that we're talking about. Because in all technicality, there's not just the 4 conditional statements, conditional, inverse, contrapositive, and converse, there's also what's known as a biconditional statement. Or a biconditional, if you prefer just that. A biconditional statement has this prefix bi on it. What does bi actually typically mean as a prefix? Two. That's why a bicycle has two wheels. Binary has two numbers involved. Bi means two. A biconditional statement is not written as an if-then statement. Instead, this statement has if and only if involved in it, and it's called biconditional because it's essentially two statements in one. A biconditional statement is a conditional and a converse all in one. The hypothesis and the conclusion of a biconditional statement are separated by the words if and only if, or if you prefer the shorter version of that, IFF means if and only if. So if you prefer writing fewer words, IFF means if and only if. Now the way that a biconditional statement works is the only way it makes sense is if both the first half and the second half are true. You can only have a biconditional statement in situations where both pieces are true. Otherwise, if one of them is false, the other one has to go false right with it. So, we're going to rewrite the conditional and its converse as a biconditional statement. That's one of the things that we can do. The statements I give you are, if you can run for president, then you are at least 35 years old. If you are at least 35 years old, then you can run for president. So that's a statement and its converse. If you want to write it as a biconditional statement, first off, you are writing one sentence. You're taking two sentences and mashing them into one. See that if at the beginning? Maybe? Yeah. Okay. Get rid of it. A biconditional statement for this is going to start with you. And in this case, you can run for president.
If you are only 35 years old.
Nope. You can run for president if you are 35 years old is the converse. If and only if. You can run for president if and only if. So you get rid of the if, you write the hypothesis. You see that then right there? It also goes away. And you finish with the conclusion. You are at least 35 years old. One sentence pushed down into two by changing the if then to an if and only if being in the middle. That's all a biconditional statement is. Okay, we're going to do one more like that. If an angle is acute, then its measures between 0 and 90. If an angle has a measure between 0 and 90, then it is acute. How many sentences am I writing right now? One. Is it going to start with the word if?
No.
Nah. an angle is acute. I wrote the hypothesis of the first one. What comes after the hypothesis? If and only if. If you prefer not to write the entire if and only if, you can write IFF. It means if and only if. We don't say if. We still say if and only if. It's just less writing. An angle is acute if and only if. Get rid of the then, and yes, it measures between 0 and 90 degrees. Do I do anything with the second sentence? No. We put the two together, it makes one sentence. You might have to go the other direction. Going the other direction can kind of help us make sense on if a biconditional is true or not. Now, we're not focusing too much right now on if they are true or if they are false, but eventually we're going to want to be able to read these and be like, yeah, that makes sense, or no. So, being able to do that is recognizing a biconditional as two sentences and asking individually if they're both true. 3 lines are coplanar if and only if they lie on the same plane. Is our original biconditional. If I want to write it as a conditional and a converse, I'm going to start with if. Now, we gotta remember something. Think back to yesterday. When we were writing our conditional, our converse, our inverse, and a contrapositive, yes, we started with if, but then we also started about went with what we were talking about, always starting the sentence. So yesterday, when we were dealing with the situation where we had an animal is a lion and it is a cat, we always had to start off with an animal, because we didn't want to start with if it. Because the question is, what's it? These sentences, you almost have to think about them as starting a paragraph. You can't start a paragraph with if it, because the question is, at the very beginning of a thought, what's the it? We did the same thing with here. A polygon's a pentagon. It has 5 sides. We couldn't start with if, so we always talked about a polygon. Now, when you write your first if-then statement from a biconditional, you don't have to worry too much. If 3 lines are coplanar, does a regular conditional statement have if and only if in it? No. So what comes after the coplanar here? Then they lie in the same plane. That's one conditional. Now I need its converse. The converse, does that add the knots? Does that flip them around, or does it do both? Just flips them around. If. Now if I just flip them around, I would start with if they. What are we talking about? What is the they? 3 lines. Make sure what you're talking about goes at the beginning. If 3 lines lie on the same plane, then they are coplanar. again, by breaking them up like this, it allows us to evaluate if the thing actually makes sense or not. If there are 3 lines on the that are coplanar, if there are 3 lines that are coplanar, are they on the same plane? That's what coplanar means.
Yes.
If they're on the same plane, are they coplanar? Yes, it's what coplanar means. So the original biconditional makes sense because both of these are true. An angle is a right angle if and only if it measures 90 degrees. I want to write it as a conditional and a converse, so I'm going to start with an if. If what? An angle is a right angle. I'm coming across the if and only if. I want to get rid of that. So yes, then it measures 90 degrees. I'm just going to use the degree symbol. Make my life easier. And now for its converse, for the flipped, for the reverse, if an angle is a key thing. We don't want to start with if it. What is the it? An angle. Measures 90 degrees. Then it is a right angle. If an angle's a right angle, does it measure 90 degrees? Yes. If an angle measures 90 degrees, is it a right angle?
Yeah.
Yes. Both of these being true makes the original true. Now, here is why this is so important, is it comes down to this last piece. The reason that we focus in on biconditional so often is because every single definition in existence can be written as a biconditional statement. And that is important, especially as we get into the second half of chapter 2, where we are going to start doing proofs, and you have to be able to recognize the fact that in a definition, if I give you the meaning, you can say the definition works. Or if I tell you it fits this definition, you can tell me it has this meaning. That's going to be a key thing that we do in the second half of chapter 2. So being able to rewrite a definition as a biconditional statement is important. So, first one. Congruent segments are 2 segments that have the same length. Okay. First thing I want to focus in on is, what am I talking about in general? What is the subject? Like this one was talking about angles. This one was talking about 3 lines. What is this talking about? Congruent segments. How many segments are necessary at minimum to have congruent segments? 2. So this is our subject. This is where I'm actually going to start this sentence. With 2 line segments. Do I really need the word line in front of segments? No. 2 segments. 2 segments. So that's the subject we're talking about. Now we are going to say they fit that definition. The definition here is congruent segments. So we are going to say those 2 segments are congruent. Because that's what we're trying to define. That's the hypothesis. That's the first part of our sentence. In a biconditional, what goes in the middle?
If and only if.
If and only if. Or the IFF. Two segments are congruent if and only if they have the same length. Or they are the same length. Whichever you prefer. Our final problem today, before we get into some practice problems. Obtuse angles are angles that measure greater than 90 but less than 180. What things are we talking about? We're trying to call them obtuse angles, and things that are obtuse angles start off as just angles. That's our subject. That's where we start. Angles. Again, I say they have the feature of the definition. They fit that definition. So I'm going to say these angles are obtuse. You saw nothing? Exactly. If and only if. I started to write angle instead of and. I mean, nothing happened. You saw nothing. Angles are obtuse if and only if they measure greater than 90 and or but less than 180. So you have to pull out what things are getting called that definition. Start your sentence that way. Say they are that definition, if and only if, what the definition means.